I think it was a home ec class in middle school. The teacher had everybody stand up around the class and say what you were going to be when you grew up. And I said I was going to be a cartoonist. And she said, no, you need to face reality. You need to be more practical. She's like, you're not going to make it.
Right.
People don't make it as artists. And I was like, some do, and I'm going to be one of those people.
Good for you.
This whole career has been devoted to proving her wrong.
Recorded at the Kitchen Studios. This is the Pencil Pushers Podcast.
Welcome, Leadheads, to our inaugural episode of the Pencil Pushers Podcast. My name is Mike Rosato, and today I sit down with my good friend Paul Friedrich, who is a prolific pop artist, creator of iconic characters like Onion Head Monster, and author of the wildly successful Man vs. Liver book. We crunched through his career highlights, which was a blast in and of itself, but this is not just a power hour of plugging Paul's incredible work. We also pull out tons of nuggets of wisdom from a working artist that continues to pave the way for himself and others that follow. So ease your seat back, settle in, and let's chat with Paul. My very first guest in the studio is one who embodies the character of the true working artist. Someone, in my opinion, who's achieved the dream of, to quote Frank Sinatra, doing it his way, and the people have followed. An individual that's been an inspiration to watch as an artist, as well as a mentor and just a solid human being. I've been honored to slowly grow my friendship with him and honored once again to have him on episode 1 of the Pencil Pushers Podcast. The one, the only, Paul Friedrich. Welcome, good sir. How are you?
Hi, Mike. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. This is really exciting. I've got a lot of questions for you, and I'll try to best get through to them as we move along, but I think it's appropriate to start in the beginning and work our way up. Where were you born, and how did art become the thing that Paul Friedrich is known for?
I was born in Raleigh, and art-wise, the stories are that I was always drawing. I was an easy kid. You just gave me some crayons, and I was happy for days.
Nice.
And it just started going towards the Sunday comics and trying to draw those.
Did that start 5 or 6, or was that later on in years? Or
2 or 3.
Okay, wow.
So
yeah.
I always knew what I wanted to do.
Right. So then what sort of drove you to building on that passion? Was there something in particular that... Did you get encouragement from parents or teachers or anything like that?
I was very lucky. I had my parents. Nobody in my family has art skills.
Okay.
So they were amazed and encouraged me at every opportunity. I didn't realize how unique that was until I got to college and found other stories. I wound up having deals with my elementary school teachers that I wasn't totally aware of, but the deal was if I did all my work, they would let me decorate the door or the bulletin board that month.
Right, gotcha.
And so it was kind of encouraged, do your work and you get to make stuff.
So basically you were drawing, and then your grades were going down, and it got to that point where or did they just see a natural talent and they were just like, you know what, let's give you an opportunity to kind of express yourself a little bit more?
And they had a secret deal with my parents that they would see me drawing in the back of the class.
Right.
And if they would call on me, and if I didn't know the answer, they would make me stop drawing. But often I would look up, say the answer, and then go back to drawing, and they realized I was still paying attention.
Right. Yeah, that's the exact opposite of my childhood. So they kept encouraging you, and they used that as sort of a tool to help you kind of flourish that a little bit more. And I guess maybe you saw that as an opportunity to build upon that somehow, or what was it that you got into high school? I know you started working, you went to school at Sanderson High School in Raleigh, North Carolina, and you had basically, you sort of hit the jackpot inadvertently by having somebody like Bob Rankin,
right,
who's another local popular artist that's been around for a long time and done, very, very prolific artist.
The most popular artist.
Yeah, exactly. And to have him as your high school teacher.
Yeah, and mentor, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So what happened at that point? Did that start at freshman year? Was he teaching you all 4 years, or how did that happen?
No, I had him for 1 year. And then they transferred him. So I was very lucky to have him for the 1 year the first year that I was there.
Okay.
And stayed in touch with him. He was just one of those people that was born to be a teacher.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
I thought it was really special and unique. And then meeting other artists throughout the years in Raleigh that all had him as a teacher, and every single person has the same exact story.
Yeah, I have a very good friend who's a graphic designer named Richard Barton. Shout out to Richard, who also had Bob Rankin, and he just goes on and on about that guy. In fact, he was here last week for another podcast. So yeah, pretty cool to actually finally meet him, actually.
For 1 year, we had a gallery show for Bob in honor of Bob Rankin. It was every student that we could find. It was a surprise show, and we had him. We coordinated to have him come to the show on First Friday thinking it was just another show.
Sure.
And it was all devoted to him.
Oh, wow.
And as soon as we started it, more and more artists just started coming in. And then we had it, and for a year later, other artists started coming for, like, why didn't you have me in the show? We're like, no idea that you were one of his students. And it's like, and it's obvious once you realize it, because there's like, oh, he sparked that imagination in every single student.
Was he sort of a defining person for you? Because for me, as an artist myself, I had a teacher who was very passionate about their students doing art and being very passionate about it themselves. But I also was quite rebellious, and the way that she went about it, even though I love her and I think her intentions were really good, the way she went about it made me rebel against art even more, which was unfortunate. It did circle back around, and we're friends now, and it's been great. And I've done a presentation at her high school, and it was pretty cool. But was Bob in some way a principal inspiration for you? Had a connection with you directly, or what was it that finally got you to the point of saying, you know what, I think this is what I really love, and maybe I can actually make it as an artist full time?
It was a little different for me. I always knew this is what I wanted to do. I had, I think it was a home ec class in middle school. The teacher had everybody stand up around the class and say what you were going to do and what you were going to be when you grew up, what job you were going to do.
Right.
And I said I was going to be a cartoonist, and she said, no, you need to face reality.
You got to be a dentist.
You need to be more practical. And she's like, you're not going to make it.
Right.
You know, people don't make it as artists. And I was like, some do, and I'm going to be one of those people.
Good for you.
So this whole career has been devoted to proving her wrong.
Wow.
And Bob was more of a slingshot. I think you told him what you wanted to do, and he was like, this is the way you do it.
Nice.
This is the path you want to do. You know, he encouraged you to follow the path that you wanted to follow. Awesome.
Shout out to Bob Rankin. I'm assuming that was freshman year, right? And then he got transferred, moving into college. And I know you went to ECU. You started out as a communication arts major, and then you moved into painting. Is that right?
Right. There's some really good cartoon schools now. There's one up in Vermont.
Sure.
Ohio State, I believe, has some cartooning stuff. Michigan State has some cartoon studies.
Right. I think SCAD actually has. They called it sequential arts.
Sequential art, yeah.
Right.
But it's SCAD.
Right.
Oof. And
so
I went there as communications, realized I was being penalized for original ideas. They had a way of doing things. This is where
templated format. Right.
Like, this is the way it's done. This is where my rebellion comes in. I'm like, okay, this is the way it's always been done. Why don't we do something different?
Yeah.
And then we're like, because this is the way it's done.
Right.
Advertising is like this. You don't change the angle of the letters.
Sure.
And I was having fun coming up with the ideas, and it wasn't by their rules. And so even though during critiques, the students really liked what I was doing and responding to what I was doing, it wasn't fitting the criteria of the assignment. And I was talking to a friend of mine, another cartoonist that was a few years ahead of me, and he was like, I had the same problem. I switched to painting. They let you do more of what you want to do.
Right.
And once you graduate from college, it doesn't matter. you're going to go into that field.
Right. So were you at that point when you switched to being a painting major? Obviously, there's a lot of snobbery that goes along in that arena as well. At least that was what I had experienced. There was the ability to sort of learn about plein air painting, and you learn about how to paint the human form and all those types of things. But when it comes to being too out there, especially if you're trying to do something a little bit more of comic style, what I experienced at SCAD was that that's for illustrators, not necessarily people who are painting majors. So maybe that was a little bit different where you were at.
It was different in the sense that the instructors did not accept cartoons as a valid art form.
Sure.
Which has been totally proven wrong in today's culture.
Yep, thankfully.
But so I had one teacher tell me it was a sad waste of talent that I wanted to do cartoons. But I discovered graffiti, and they accepted that, and it was close enough to cartoons for me. And then there was this whole internal debate, like, is it better to stick to your path and learn as you go, or is it better to try things outside your comfort zone that you can pull in later to it? And I still don't know the answer to that.
Right.
But they let me do graffiti style artwork, and I graduated with a painting degree.
Nice. Still vastly different than what you actually quickly moved into after you graduated, because you started, from what I've read, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I know that, so you graduated in 89, right? ECU.
Right.
So there was the decade of the 90s that I still don't have much information on, which I'm very interested in, because eventually you transitioned to you were working with the Independent Weekly, and that's basically how your first, I guess, major character sort of outside of college became popularized, right? I know there's Hubie the Dead Cow, if you could talk about that, maybe.
Gladly. So Hubie the Dead Cow was my college cartoon.
Okay.
And people either really, really loved it or didn't get it at all. And it was a living dead cow. It was a cow skull that had come to life. This guy had moved into an abandoned house that was haunted by this dead cow. And the dead cow for years had gotten rid of everybody by scaring them away, and he was happy being alone. And this one guy was totally unaffected by it. And after several months of trying to scare him away, he gave up and just started watching TV and drinking beer with them.
Right.
And they became friends, and then there was a lot of adventures. So in the timeline, you're missing the Robert Johnson crossroads where I left North Carolina and I went out west for a couple of years.
Okay.
And in that time, I had a minor character from another story called Onion Head Monster that I wasn't doing much with. And then when I was living in L.A., I had a story idea for her. I was like, I need to put this down. Mm-hmm. And I started doing it, and people started responding positively immediately. And it was where Hubie had been divided, everybody of all ages, all demographics loved Onion Head Monster.
Right. So I want to actually backtrack just a little bit, because I think we're really missing an important part that we haven't talked about. We've got Hubie the Dead Cow. If you look at your work throughout the years, your characters live, it's like the seedy underbelly of a comic hero's universe, where it's kind of this mixture of R. Crumb and Ralph Bakshi, and
Adam's family,
the dark alleys of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It's the sort of like the underworld somewhat. So it's like this anti-hero a lot of times that I see with your work. And how did that sort of develop? Based on your background of, my understanding is that you were watching a lot of Warner Brothers cartoons, kind of classic cartoons, Hanna-Barbera, et cetera. Like, how did it come to that point where you were like, no, I kind of like these quirkier characters. They're more interesting to me, obviously.
I guess from the TV shows I was watching, like Bugs Bunny is another example. Airplane, Animal House, Blues Brothers, those kind of movies. Just that pop culture is what the dark humor.
Yep. Gotcha. So then that kept evolving, and then fast forward to Onion Head Monster. So you developed this character, and people started to immediately respond to it.
And so I started doing more of that. Then I moved back to North Carolina and was doing the comic strips. And the goal was to become syndicated in a paper. But a couple of things were happening. I was seeing the decline of newspapers. The daily newspapers were reducing the comics size.
Yep. The whole
smaller
pages.
And smaller.
Yep.
They're cramming more and more stuff in there. They're getting rid of them. Also, the format, the 3 or 4 panels, no longer fit the stories I wanted to tell. It was too limiting. At the same time, the alternative comics were
becoming more
popular. There were still a lot of zines. There was still a lot. At the time, there was a lot of stories about people's lives, first-person stories.
Yep.
And a lot of them, which annoyed me, was I'm so lonely. I'm going to the laundromat to do wash my clothes.
Sure.
There's a beautiful woman.
She's way too good for me.
She's way too good for me. She'll never talk to me.
Right.
Go home and masturbate.
Right. And then it's sort of Daniel Clowes classic kind of comic strip.
Right.
Right.
Without the great art.
Sure.
And my thing was about entertainment. And so the quirky characters were more fun to play with.
Totally, yeah. Tons of exuberance, energy, comedy.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so I'm doing those comic books, and I started doing the comic conventions like SPX up in Maryland that is devoted to that. It's not most comic book conventions at the time were still very, very superhero oriented. Yep. This was more like, what else do you got?
Yep.
And it fit me perfect. It was a good wave to get in on.
When did you start attending that?
Too late, but it was like late 90s.
Okay.
I avoided them for a long time.
That was too late?
Well, I like anything else, you feel like you should have done it earlier.
Sure.
And I still kept, I tried doing a few local comic book conventions, and they were very, very superhero, and people would come. I shared a table with somebody, and we spent the whole convention directing people where they wanted to go. Like, oh, you want sword and sorcery? That guy has some good stuff. You know, like, we've got some funny, humorous comics, and they're like,
it's a whole other topic right there. That's a whole other podcast. My God.
Do you have a Viking comic? And like, oh no, that guy over there, you'll love his stuff. So I was like, I'm not doing comic book conventions. And then I was convinced later. But so I'm doing the comic strips, and I'm like, I really want to be in weekly newspapers. They were going more for the edgy humor that I had. And I was also like, I did Artsplosure, which is a weekend art festival in Raleigh.
Yep.
And a few other festivals, and I was doing paintings, and they were selling. And one of the things I started doing with the paintings, I was like, at the time, paintings were separate from my cartoons. So paintings had to be paintings, and cartoons were cartoons.
Interesting, yeah.
And I was in that fine arts mindset.
Yep.
And like doing abstracts and all this other stuff. And then I was like, I want to see what my cartoons would look like in color
on canvas.
And I was painting big canvases, and I'm like, I want to see what it looks like as a billboard, as a small billboard. And I was doing those, and those started selling immediately.
Right.
And then I started doing coffee shops. And the funny thing is, I had approached the newspaper to try to do a weekly comic, and that had been rejected. And so I started doing the paintings, hanging them at coffee shops and restaurants around town.
Are you talking about the paintings that were more graphic in nature? Yeah.
Yeah, cartoon paintings.
Yep.
Big cartoon paintings. And after a couple of shows, an editor from the newspaper contacted me and was like, have you ever thought about doing a weekly comic? And I was like, "You're a genius. Where do you come up?
Couldn't have said it better
where
myself.
Do you come up with these ideas?" I would love to do that, and that's how I got in.
Nice. And you did that for several years.
For a long time.
Yeah.
And in fact, I started off with, there were several other people, and I was like the longest running. And then what happened is Craigslist wound up destroying the weekly newspapers because of the classified ads.
Wow. Okay.
And then the internet further eroded it. And so all the weekly newspapers, the Village Voice is gone.
Sure.
But before they left, they canceled Matt Groening and they canceled Pfeiffer.
Luckily, Matt wound up being okay.
Yeah, he's managing. Ernie Pook's Corner. So everybody started to drop cartoonist, which
it was again uncool.
Uncool. Well, the thing is, like, cartoons take up valuable space that they can use for advertising.
Sure.
But everybody knows that people were going to the newspapers for the comics.
Sure.
At one point. So that market disappeared, and so I'm no longer in the independent.
Yeah.
In fact, they fired let their editorial cartoonist go a couple years ago, and he had been there forever.
Wow. So that ended, what, late 90s? Is that right?
No, it was mid
90s.
Well, no, 2005, I think.
Okay. So then, what happened after that? And are you're still? My understanding is that you're still basically building this brand in essence, without sounding too corny about it, and don't take that the wrong way. But you're still building this brand of Onion Head Monster, but also the brand of Paul Friedrich. Now, this is starting to evolve.
That was a marketing decision.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. Like, a lot of this conversation is, one, for the listeners 100%, but also for me. I'm just incredibly curious, and I feel like I'm learning from you every time I talk to you. I mean, that's the reality.
Comes back.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because one of the things that I want to do is I want to be able to pull really valuable information for people who are wanting to do the same things that you and I are doing in maybe even grander ways, right?
That's why I'm thrilled you're doing this, because so many people were so helpful to me along the way.
Yep.
That you doing this gets it out to even more people.
Well, it's one of the reasons, not to pat each other's on the back or anything, but that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on as the first guest, because a little segue here is you have always been incredibly helpful, incredibly filled with resources, and never shy to lend a hand, which is just an amazing thing for me to experience. So
there's an ulterior motive I love competition.
Right.
And I've seen it. It's happened to me in some places. I've seen it in other people. But if you have no competition, you just stay at this one level.
I love that. Yeah.
But if the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, or the Beatles and the Beach Boys,
right,
if they do something great, you're like, I got to be better next time.
Right.
So if you're doing great stuff, if George Haig is doing stuff, like.
So you're like your next book that maybe you will or won't talk about right now that you just completed. That'll be your pet sounds, and then I'll have to come up with Revolver, I guess, maybe, or something.
Which just makes me, it's like, it's great.
Right.
The healthy competition is.
So again, wrapping this back up, this goes back to your idea of branding yourself, marketing yourself. It's still very interesting. And actually, I was talking to Max, our producer, about this before, about this idea of the starving artist. And this might be a good segue because I think that in a lot of ways...
Gets me fed a lot.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. But in a lot of ways, I think that this idea of the starving artist has been permeated for so long in the minds of people who are buying or not buying art, as well as the people who are artists or want to be artists. It's this psychological thing that gets put in our brain that makes it immediately think that I can't make money, and therefore I can't do it. Or if I am doing it, I'm never going to be successful because I'm never going to make money doing it.
And you never will with that attitude.
Exactly, right. So was that something, I have a feeling that this was something that was in your brain already. You already had this fire, like intuitively you already felt that, no, I have full confidence that I can really do some cool stuff that at least I'm really going to enjoy. And I really just have this funny feeling that other people are going to enjoy it too.
It's this realization, one, this is what I want to do. I've had jobs for a little while. I didn't like them. And this is what I want to do. And so this is what I want to do, I have to find a way to be able to do it.
Yeah.
There is that attitude. Well, one, the defining moment for me, some friends opened a restaurant, and we were talking about it, and the statistics are that 9 out of 10 fail in the first year. Mm-hmm. So if you're a reasonable person or a smart person, someone told you the odds of stepping out, if you step outside your house 9 out of 10 times, you're going to be shot. You would stay inside.
Right.
So why, if you're told that you're going to fail, why put all this money and effort into opening a restaurant? Because you're stupid and you're like, I'm going to succeed. My restaurant is going to succeed. Mm. And so it's like, stop outsmarting yourself. Mm. And odds are, it's very difficult to be a successful artist. It's very difficult to get a TV show, which is what I want. It's very difficult to get a publishing deal. Mm-hmm. But people get them. So why not me? Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this is a little bit like how I am too. I was certainly a very rebellious and still rebellious in many, many ways, and it's helped me in that same amount of ways. When you're rebellious, I think there's an element of that fire that's in you that, no, I can do it this way.
Going back to that middle school teacher.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I think in some ways my high school teacher sort of propelled me that way too. That was already inside of you, said, no, I'm going to do it my way. And just through the passion of being excited about the competition, the excitement about like proving people wrong, you got to that point of like, well, I'm just going to be clever enough to figure out how to navigate these waters, much like an entrepreneur would.
And also I had early success that got me to the next stage. Enough to like, okay, I can
to validate that this can work.
I can leave my day job, and then it was like nothing happens, and then 3 months, a really great gallery show or an opportunity comes along, and you're like, this is it, I've made it, and then 3 months of nothing.
Sure.
And just when you're ready to give up, an opportunity presents itself, and then the next year, it's like a month and a half between those things. And then the third year, it's like every 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And it just
and you start to figure out the rhythm of that, I would imagine.
And then some of it's, like, I want to do it. I want this, like Onion Head Monster was a side character, 2 pages out of a 20-page comic book. And it was all about this one character, but everybody responded to Onion Head Monster. And it was like, at first you're like, no, you're supposed to pay attention to this guy. Mm-hmm. And it's like, no, people want to hear stories of this. And it's like, give the people what they want sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as long as it's still what you want to do.
Yeah, that's actually another interesting point of, I'm also a musician. I've learned over the years that self-indulgence is not necessarily your best friend. You have to play to the crowd in a lot of ways. Now, but as you're doing, how do you do that in a way that is powerfully exciting for you to keep going rather than just winding up being some sort of tribute band that plays at a wedding every weekend?
Which is tough because they're the ones that make the money.
Right. So it's the road less traveled in a lot of ways.
Right. You can take the Simpsons knockoffs and Bob's Burgers knockoffs, but that's not what I want to do.
Right. And I should note just really quickly that it's not to say that you can't be the wedding band for a little while you're working through those other things.
Or like photographers that are wedding photographers.
Right.
The weekend pays for their week to do what they want to do. So I take, commercial jobs that are cartoon related, and I find a way to make those fun.
Yeah.
But the key is I figured out several things early on, and one of them was do the art that makes you happy. Like, I do paintings that I want to see what they look like, because if they don't sell, they're going to be on my wall for a long time. And I found that when you try to please everybody, nobody likes it. And so you pick what entertains you, and that's where you find your success. And then also be aware that you can't predict what people are going to respond to.
Right.
And
But be able to jump on something that you see that is catching.
Right. I've talked to many artists. We've talked about it before. You can have a gallery show with 10 paintings. There's one that you're like, this, I'm a genius. This, everyone's going to love this. Maybe I should make more of this one. And then there's the 10th one that you're going to throw away, but you needed a 10th painting to hang on the wall. So you put it up and you're not happy with it. And every single time, that's the painting that everybody responds to. And every artist has that story. And it makes you question a lot of stuff, but you have to be like, well, I made it.
Right.
It's still mine. And be willing to, okay, like in art school, people are like, you're selling out. I'm like, but I want to do pop culture. I'm a pop culture artist. People buying my stuff is a good thing.
Right.
If people don't buy it, then I'm not relating to them.
Yep.
And I see nothing wrong for the art I do. That's the goal, which allows me to make more things. But then the key is find something that is successful, and that one thing will pay for 2 other experiments.
So that's a really good segue into where it started out as the big breakout was Onion Head Monster. Yeah. And then you reached another level with another hit. You found another bit of lightning in a bottle with Man vs. Liver.
Total
or is it
accident.
Man v. Liver? Which one is it?
It's either, but Man v. Liver.
Gotcha.
MVL.
Gotcha. So how did that come about?
That was another, like, being aware of when it hits. It was a lark. It was not intentional. Neil Hansen, that I created it with, known him for a long time. We had talked about collaborating. He's a very witty writer, very smart, very
guy.
Sarcastic. And we were talking one day at the Raleigh Times down the road and sitting outside on a nice spring day. And he said, he quipped something, as he does. And
do you remember what it was?
I'd have to look.
Yeah.
And I wrote it down on the napkin, and I did a quick sketch of a man drinking. And the waitress came over, and she's like, "What do you got there?" And she read it and cracked up and was like, "Can I have it?" And as a joke, we were like, "You buy us another round, and you can have it." She's like, "Sure." And he said a couple more things, and so I wrote it down because it was fun. And then she sent another waitress out, and she's like, "Can I have one too?" And we're like, "Well, here's one that's ready to go."
Lightning in a bottle.
And then the bartender came out, and they were like, "We'll buy you shots." I'm like, "Right on." And so, like, I think we're kind of onto something, but they're easy. Like,
was there any intention beforehand that this was a possibility of potentially working together in some way?
Like, we'd
right.
Trying to figure out what we were going to do that weekend or something.
Right.
And it was just,
or how to get free drinks.
No, it wasn't even that. It was just he said something, and I just absentmindedly, I had a pen in my hand and I wrote it down. If we had planned it, it would not have worked.
Right.
So it would, like, at the time, like Onion Head Monster or any comic I do takes 4 to 8 hours a page to do, to write it, to sketch it, to put it into the computer, to color it.
Is that single panel or does it matter?
Well, 4 to 6 panels on a page. Or it depends how elaborate the single panel is. But it takes a good amount of time. And there's a lot of Photoshop. I use Photoshop, and there's a lot of, in my mind, is this arm, should it be above the shoulder or should it be on the waist? Or which way should the eye be looking? So I spent 8 hours on a page that takes somebody 15 seconds to read.
Right.
And I'm aware of that, but I'm like, at some point, 100 years from now, somebody's going to be analyzing this, and I want it to be right for that one person that maybe will look at it. So we did this thing, and was like, all right, let's do a 5-minute rule, because Neil's a copywriter.
Yep.
And very skilled at crafting words, and he'll do the same. He'll spend a lot of time getting these words right for the clients. And so we set up a 5-minute rule that he says it or I say it. You write it down. We don't analyze it. We don't edit it. We don't craft it. And then the drawing, what I draw, is what goes into the panel. I don't get over analytical about, should his leg be longer? Should the table be better? More proportional? It is what it is. And because it was so easy, within a month, 2 months, we had 100 of them. And I was like, that's enough for a book. Mm. And so we put it together as a book, printed them up. I was like, next month is Comic-Con. I should take them with me. And so I printed up a bunch. He had a bunch. He was going to come out that year. Took them with me, had a whole bunch of stuff that I was like, this is going to be my big hit. This is a T-shirt that I wish I could bring more. Mm-hmm. And the Man versus Liver books were like, here they are.
Right.
And everybody responded to it. And I hadn't seen anything like that since I'd created Onion and Monster. Mm. And people would walk by the aisle, across the aisle at somebody else's booth, catch the cover out the side of their eye and come to it.
Right.
And then we found everybody has a drinking story, even people that don't drink. And so people would open it up and go, that's me. Or the other favorite one was they'd be in a group and they were like, hey, point to their friend, this is you. This is so you. And you'd see the reaction on the friend's face, like reading it. And it's either going to be, this is what they think of me. But more often they were like, oh, yeah, that was me. And then they would each buy a copy. And I had started off at a low price. And
how much were you selling them for?
I started off at $10 for a book, for a 100-page book, because they're just one panel, one-liners. There's not much to them. And people kept buying them, and I was running out. So I was like, 15, and they kept selling. I was like, 20.
Right.
And people were doing it. And people were like...
100.
People were like putting them in their bag and then going, how much? And like, 25. And they're like, sure. I never had anybody put them back. And so I got in touch with Neil. I was like, don't bring any clothes. Just put every book that you have in a suitcase and bring them. We wound up getting a licensing deal from that convention. From that licensing deal, we were able to get a publishing deal.
A pretty big, amazing publishing company.
Yeah. They print Calvin and Hobbes. They print
Peanuts,
Doonesbury, Garfield, everybody, and Andrews McNeil. And the lesson that we took from that was a very American lesson. Like, don't try. Just do the least amount that you can do, and you'll be the most successful.
So how did you develop your style? And the reason I'm asking that is it's very easy to say I want to become an artist. It's very easy to say I want to become a pop artist. But it's difficult to find that style, and sometimes it's instinctive, and I would imagine that I'm sure that some of that is the case for you. But did you have to develop that style over a period of time? Because when you say somebody walks by from a crowded hallways and they see what you've posted, your posters, that your style is very, very, you get an immediate reaction when you see your work. Is that something that took a while, or was that automatic? Did you already have that inside your artwork that you were creating from an early age, or did you have to work hard to find that kind of vibe?
That's a great question. I hope somebody finds the answer to that. That was my,
because it's kind of the secret sauce in some way. That
I mean, a lot of it. Don't know if you, growing up, did you want to do superhero stuff when you were?
No, I actually wanted to be an animator. Okay. I mean, in the beginning, yes, I did. I was infatuated with that stuff for sure.
Okay. So middle school, when we were getting into comic books, like everybody wanted to draw superheroes, and I kept drawing them, and like, that doesn't look like a Marvel superhero. And at the time, we were like, that's what it has to be. And
Right.
over time, and then I started discovering Bloom County, Calvin Hobbes, Far Side, and I'm like going back to my childhood. It was like all drawing Snoopy and Woodstock and
Yep, me too.
Charlie Brown. And I was like, this is what I like to draw, cartoon-looking characters, and now the world has caught up. Like, you don't have to draw. I was drawing Star Wars stuff, and they were like, that doesn't look like, you can't draw Star Wars as a cartoon. Star Wars has to be
hyper-realistic.
And now it's a total market for that.
Yep.
So
you paved the way, man.
I did. Yeah, it's the front line that gets shot. But so I just, I followed my cartoon things, and then I discovered the guy that does Mutts.
Yeah. Yeah.
He published a book on George Herman, who does Crazy Cat from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, that I'd always heard about, and I would confuse with Felix the Cat. But he published a book, and it was the first time I'd seen his stuff, and it's equivalent of jazz music for comics, and he just expanded, like what you could do in a comic, and
Sure.
was doing it in the 30s. And I took a lot from that, and then combined, the lessons I learned along the way, graffiti, like do your thing.
So were you seeing that and saying, I need to do that because I personally appreciate it, or is it because you had that innate sense that I want to make sure that people are able to appreciate, in other words, that the masses would appreciate that type of style?
I think I'll go with innate. But also, it's success breeds success. People responded to it. We could probably go back and look at some early stuff and see where
that started
that path took off. And then it's, don't be satisfied with what you're doing.
Yeah.
And like, you can always be better.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make myself better. And then you wind up looking at stuff 5 years earlier, and the stuff you didn't like then, you're like, oh, I really like the rawness to that now. I can appreciate it. So it's just, I just like to make stuff.
Yeah.
And as it develops. And I'm very fortunate. I've got, because I know a lot of artists like you do and a lot of musicians that are extremely talented that don't connect with people or connect with a very tiny audience.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very lucky that my stuff is broad enough that it's not for everybody, but the people that love it, love it.
Absolutely. So we're getting really close to time, which is unfortunate, and I want to make sure that I'm making enough room for some of the tougher questions.
Okay.
So brace yourself.
Let's go to the bonus round.
You've had a very, very successful career, and I still want to talk so much more about it. We're going to have to do a part 2.
I'll come back for the Christmas special.
That's it. I'll bring the eggnog. So you've had such a successful career, and how do you really, that's from my perspective, do you feel like you've had, number one, do you feel like you've had a successful career, and what does that mean to you or for you?
Yes and no. Like I said, I'm very lucky to each year be able to continue to do what I want to do. But there's more that I want to do. I've come close to getting TV shows, but not close enough. There's,
maybe even with MVL, huh?
Yeah, we've come close with that. And that, could always still happen. And then there's a feeling like I'm doing well on Instagram, but then you find somebody else that you're like, I can't believe they got a book deal, and then you see that they get 7,000 likes within 15 minutes, and you're like, okay, there's room to grow.
I love that. that's basically how you see it. You strike me as somebody who doesn't get too down about things. You're always looking. You're quite an optimist. Is that the case, or do you waver from one end of the spectrum to another?
I think I keep aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah, you were using a great example, which we were talking about before we started this session. And I think it'd be interesting to talk about how you viewed this artist and how he created this unbelievable book that just got released. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because it feels pretty amazing. And then
Michael Cooperman, probably best known for tales designed to thrizzle. Did also another comic strip called Snake and Bacon. Had a episode on Adult Swim that they ran once. Did really great, and then they decided not to pick up the show. He just put out a fascinating book based on his father's life. His father was a child genius in the 40s and was a star of a kids' quiz show, and it wound up ruining his life in many ways due to his success and due to his intelligence. And Michael Cooperman did this book based on his dad's life as a way of understanding why his dad was the way he was and why he was the type of father that he was.
Wow. Sounds like a movie.
It's a lot of stuff in there, but also explains the genius of his comics. And I have always felt that he's several miles ahead of me on the road of success. And I was nominated for an Eisner one year for Onion Head Monster, which is
no small feat.
Thank you. For the comic book industries, it's their Oscar. And we're in the same category as Best Humor. And we wound up losing to a living legend, Bob Burden, Flaming Carrot, and some others. But I always feel like I lost to him.
Right.
Because his stuff is just so great, and it's will make, you can't stop yourself from laughing from reading his stuff.
Right.
And anyway, recently he put out this book earlier this year, and the stuff that he communicates on Twitter, you realize, even though I see him as successful and other people are huge fans of his, he sees himself in the same light. Like, what am I not doing? What more could I be doing? And there's no easy answer to that.
Yeah. Same thing with Chris Ware, as we were talking about earlier. Somebody who's so incredibly prolific, just unbelievable. Like, you think that there's an army of artists that are working in this little studio, just pile driving through all this work, and it's just him. And yet he still feels as though he's not worthy.
Yeah. And Bill Watterson.
Same way?
Same way. I read there was a book where he commented on the comic strips, and there's a drawing that he did of dinosaurs, which you're like, if I drew that, I'd be done. This is like my perfect thing. Like, I could not be better than this.
Right.
And in the commentary, this is what I did wrong. I wish I could fix this. This was bad. This joke didn't land. And you're like, if these guys that I look up to, Charles Schultz was the same way, if they're not happy with what they're doing, then it's okay not to be satisfied with what I'm doing. And the thing is, don't worry about it. Just make it and move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And that gets you, point B gets you to C, gets you to D, and you could stay in that circle of, I'm going to fix it, I'm going to make it better, I'm going to George Lucas it, and you'll never get anywhere.
Exactly. I love this story with John Coltrane and Miles Davis. There's a story, I think, in the Miles Davis biography book where he talks about John Coltrane. He's having a conversation with John, and John, who's obviously known for these being firstly a brilliant genius saxophone player, used to these long-winded solos, and Miles Davis was talking to him one time, and he said, John was complaining about, like, I keep soloing and sometimes I don't know when to stop. And so he's asking Miles for some advice, and Miles says to him, "You take the horn out your mouth." Right? And I think that's just something that happens a lot of times and I know that this happens a lot of times with me too. I have my own insecurities as an artist, and many times I feel like it's just not good enough yet. I can't let it go. It's not ready. And a lot of times it's literally just about saying, I have to just let it go.
That's great about deadlines. And then you
Absolutely.
look at TV shows, Bugs Bunny cartoons that they made in the 40s. They were making them, and because they were due on Friday, and then you just went on to the next one.
Yep.
And sometimes what happens, like in a music album, they put out 10 or 12 songs, but only 2 of them are good.
Right.
But you remember those 2.
Sure.
And over a lifetime, you get 6, 8, 10.
A whole body of work.
Great songs, but there's so many others that just fall off.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. Like, not every cartoon page that I do is going to be genius or memorable, but the ones that hit are going to hit.
Nice. So you're
so make it.
Yeah, that's so great, because you're essentially what you're doing is you're looking at it from the long view, and you don't necessarily micro focus specifically on one certain thing.
Well, you look at baseball players, like they fail 7 out
of 10
times, and that's
a Hall of Famer,
right? So you're thinking an average person's thing. If you failed 8 out of 10 times at the office,
you'd be fired immediately.
But 2 out of 10 is great, or is okay,
right.
For a baseball player.
So in other words, go for singles and doubles. Don't worry
Right.
about hitting the homer
Just-
all the time.
Just swing.
Yeah, there you go. Nice. So final question before we start getting into details about where we can find your stuff and what's coming up next. Is there a legacy you're trying to create? And if so, what is it, Paul Friedrich?
At this point, it's a legacy for my descendants or whoever finds my box of sketchbooks in 25, 30 years after I die, where they herald me as a genius and they make billions of dollars producing all my stories and characters.
And then you're there as a ghost going, "Where was it when I was alive?"
Exactly. And they're like, "This is great. Why? He was a genius, but we're rich."
Awesome. All right, Paul. So this has been a blast, and unfortunately it's gone by way too fast, but
It's amazing.
Can you tell us a little bit about where we can find your stuff?
Yeah, you can go.
And what's up next, too, by the way?
You can go to the internet. Twitter, it's all Paul, @allpaul. Instagram is paulfriedrich.net. There's also a website, paulfriedrich.net. Facebook is open under Paul Friedrich. That's where I would recommend people. I've got stuff all over Amazon. You can search for Paul Friedrich T-shirts, and those should pull up a bunch of different T-shirt ideas.
Nice.
So that's where part of my future is going, is T-shirt designs and selling them on Amazon. Another direction is just finished a brand new Onion Head Monster comic book, graphic novel.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Congrats. Huge feat.
So I'm excited about that. It's things really came together on this one. Like, it's very rare, like the way you envision something and putting it on page, it just fell into place. So I've got big expectations for that. The convention season's getting ready to start, so I'll find out if it's going to be a success or if I'm going to be like Michael Kupperman and
wallow in self-pity somewhere in a lonely bar.
What happened? And then you're sad, and then you start doing another book. So I've got another Onion Head Monster book that is written
outside of the one that you just completed.
I just completed this one. Yeah, I've got one that's written and storyboarded, one that is outlined, another half of one that's written, and I've got Awesome McAwesome and Bob Defeat, which is a daredevil and an intergalactic bounty hunter that are both accident prone. They have an adventure. I've got an alphabet book. I've got 3 other books.
Right. So basically, you're not very busy right now, which is okay.
No, it's
I think
great.
you'll work your way up.
Yeah, I'm good for the next decade. I've got other, story ideas for TV pitches. I've got painting ideas.
All right, now you're just showing off.
So,
Well, that's freaking awesome, man. Well, great. I think this is pretty much it for the end of episode 1. Completed, in the can, ready to rock. Paul Friedrich, everybody. Thank you so much, my man.
Thank you, Mike.
We're definitely going to do a part 2 for sure, and 3 and 4 at some point soon. So
I recommend it to all my friends.
awesome, man. Thank you so much. Have a great night. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Pencil Pushers Podcast. Follow us on Instagram at the Pencil Pushers Podcast for visual representation of our guest artwork, topics discussed, and anything else that contributes to the show. Be sure to subscribe. Tell a friend. Tell lots and lots of friends. Become a leadhead. And we're out.